Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, a place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, along with music as well as inspiration. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter/X at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod One. You can also follow me on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm the social media producer for Perfect Plex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox, on Mondays at 6 p.m. So, with that being said, uh, this is definitely going to be, an episode that's going to be very wrestling dominated as many of them are. So of course, without further ado, I will say that this road to WrestleMania is looking pretty bloody right now. It's being paved with blood right now at this point, um, especially with so much hostility and so much animosity and hate. Whether it's on screen or online. I mean, there are things that works, and also a lot of stuff that's dominant shoot turned into a work. Um, you know, and so of course you have dirt sheets that are filling in because you have insiders within the locker room that are leaking stuff to them. But I'll get to that later. And of course, I mean, oh, it was definitely toxic. Online Twitter. I mean, I've seen Twitter get pretty toxic about a lot of stuff, but this one right here is one that you know will never be forgotten. Especially when it comes to these title matches, between Rhea Ripley and Jade Cargill, as well as Roman Reigns and CM Punk, and like I said, I'll get to that in a minute. But first and foremost, I want to say, you know, uh, of course, congratulations to Lash Legend for winning her first championship in WWE since whether it's NXT, the main roster, her first championship of her career. As her and Nia Jax become the new women's tag team champions. You know what I mean? Of course, on Friday Night SmackDown, so that was the highlight for me. And of course, this past Friday's episode of SmackDown, certainly, you know, certainly the go home show right before Elimination Chamber. Of course, the chamber took place in Chicago, hometown of World Heavyweight Champion CM Punk. And I will say that I was at least 2 out of 2 in these predictions this time. Hey, you don't get them right all the time, but regardless, so I'm gonna give a rundown of some of the things that happened this past Friday on SmackDown. So of course we saw that Logan Paul defeated Jacob Fatu by way of pinfall to qualify for the Elimination Chamber match. Following interference from Drew McIntyre, who attacked Jacob. Of course, additionally, as I said before, Lash and Nia became the new women's tag team champions by defeating Rhea Ripley and Io Sky. So some of the highlights were that in the opening match, Jey Uso was found attacked backstage early in the show. And of course, backstage, we saw that Jade Cargill confronted Raquel Rodriguez. That's a very intriguing future matchup among many for Jade. And so we saw backstage. I'm sorry, I already said that. But of course, other matches, we saw that Uncle Howdy defeated Solo Sikoa. Of course, we saw a brawl backstage between Cody Rhodes, Randy Orton, LA Knight, and many others. So of course, we also, like I said before, Logan defeated Jacob, after Drew's attack, and most importantly, like I said, of course, the irresistible forces, Lash and Nia, as they're called, like I said, defeated Rio, for the tag team titles, and so Rhea is freed up for the Elimination Chamber, and this past Saturday, the biggest highlight for me was watching the Elimination Chamber of course, at AMC in Tyson's Corner. And so that was definitely an experience. And this is not the first time that I've seen a PLE or, like a WWE event at a movie theater, because the first time I ever did that was was WrestleMania night one of WrestleMania 38 back in 2022. And, over the of course the AMC and AMC Alexandria. I thought it was great. I definitely enjoyed that night. Something I'll never forget. you know, um, but and of course another time that I did that was WrestlePalooza. Of course this past September, and then and of course this past Saturday with the Elimination Chamber. And so so the very first match, and of course, by the way, by the way, like I said, Elimination Chamber took place, took place in Chicago. So it took place at the United Center, home of the Chicago Bulls, and so the first match of the night, the first match of the night was the women's Elimination Chamber. And by the way, side note, of course, Happy Women's History Month. You know what I mean? And of course, women heroes matter and women wrestlers matter. And so that's what I've been doing. Um, that's what I do. Like all throughout the month of March, each time, I highlight, of course, great women, highlight women's wrestlers. And also, highlight, of course, women superheroes as well. And of course, I also give a spotlight to women athletes. Like I see, of course, in between that, also, what I mean, and so, like I say, of course, March is Women's History Month, and it's should be an extended Black History Month as well. So let's go ahead and put both of those together at the same time. Why not? And so as far as that, um, like I said, the very first match of the night was the Women's Elimination Chamber. And so of course, um, the match consisted of Rhea Ripley, Asuka, Raquel Rodriguez, Rhea Ripley, Asuka, Raquel Rodriguez, Alexa Bliss, Kalani Jordan. I mean, not excuse me, Kiana James. Excuse me, I said Kalani. Like I said, of course, like I said, it consisted of Rhea Ripley, Asuka, Raquel Rodriguez, Alexa Bliss, Kiana James, and Tiffany Stratton. And the winner of that match was Rhea Ripley. But I will say that that Raquel was very impressive in that match, including having a double pin, doing a double elimination, and of course, of course, like I said, one of my picks was Asuka. Like I said, a dark horse pick, but considering who was in there, I figured that Rhea, that Rhea was going to be the one to take it. So as far as that, um, the Eradicator, aka Mommy, was the one to go on and win. As I figured that she would. You know what I mean? And so at first there was a point that I was kind of nervous that they were going to let tippy time. Of course, be the winner, but I'm glad that they didn't. You know what I mean? And so as far as that's concerned, even though I did want to see Charlotte in the chamber, because of all the different stare downs, that her and Jade have had. So it's just like that match is right there. They're on the same brand. They constantly, you know, um, like I said, they're constantly, having stare downs and entertaining the idea. So the last show they've had, keep it count, at least 4 stare downs. Um, as far as I can remember, at least. And so I'm like, that's money right there. People would question Jade's in-ring skill, whatever you have it, but Charlotte would definitely bring the best out of her. And we talk about physique. They're both 5'10". You know what I mean? And so it's just like very pretty even physically. Jade's got more muscle, but still, I mean, that right there would be you know, a legendary, legendary feud. You know what I mean? Like that. That would definitely be a dream match. You know what I mean? That would be a future, you know, legendary, feud for the ages, if you will. But yeah, but nonetheless, of course, we have Rhea Ripley. But the thing is, I know that Rhea, I know that Rhea was definitely uh, one of the dream matchups that I had in mind for Jade when she was first coming to WWE. As a matter of fact, I even wrote an article about, um, you know, uh, the matchups that I like to see Jade have, and Rhea was one of them. You know, was it Rhea, Charlotte, Bianca? You know what I mean? So you know what I mean. So at least Jade's checking that. Of course, checking that box off right now. You know what I mean? So like I said, the winner of the match, Rhea, and so we'll definitely get some more of that in a minute. You know what I mean? And so next up, and of course, a side note, I'm still in the middle of my WrestleMania marathon, if you will, here on Netflix. As right now, I'm finishing up the rest of WrestleMania 13. As right now, I'm getting ready to get to pretty much get into this Shawn Michaels. I mean, not Shawn Michaels. This Undertaker and Sid match. Of course, Shawn was the guest commentator, but regardless, another story. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, um, so after the Elimination Chamber, we have uh, the Women's Intercontinental Championship match. The man Becky Lynch, aka the quote unquote greatest of all time. As you know, of course, she's not the only one who says it. Sports Illustrated said it. Sports Illustrated said it. Bleacher Report has said it. So, of course, that just pads on a resume, right? So she goes on to defend the championship against AJ Lee, who is, um, the adopted hometown hero, just because she's married to CM Punk. You know what I mean? So it's just like you gotta have that, I guess, crowd favorite thing going on. And so this definitely had AJ's chance to shake off 10 years of ring rust. I'm talking about in terms of, rather in terms of solo matches. And so yeah, so as far as that, this is AJ's first official solo match since her return. Because all the other times, her deficiencies have been covered through tag matches. You know what I mean? Whether it was the mixed tag match, with her and Punk versus Becky and Seth, or or that War Games match. And so yeah, so now at this point, of course, so at this point, AJ, has to prove herself on her own, against someone who has, who's been consistent, who's had a consistent run within the company from NXT all the way, all the way through, through her main roster run, a 10 or at least 11-year run on the main roster at this point, with Becky Lynch, who's established herself, as a legend and a future Hall of Famer. And so of course, it's very clear that Becky was going to be the one, to make this match better than it would be had AJ been with somebody else. You know what I mean? So as far as that is concerned, but yeah, like I said, as far as that, you know, and so we definitely saw it, and but anyway, um, you know, I will, like I said, I will say that Becky, that Becky definitely made the most out of this situation, and she really made AJ look, look, like I said, look much better than she normally would, that she would have under anyone else. And so at first I was thinking that Becky was going to keep the title, but it turns out, that the AJ ends up winning it. This is her first time ever becoming a women's Intercontinental champion. But then again, that title hadn't been around that long. You know what I mean? So as far as that, I guess this is part of AJ's return. You know, like I said, her victory lap or Renaissance tour, whatever the case is. That of course that she won a title, and so like I said, of course it was a great way to have a hometown favorite win. And there was a part of me that was thinking that if AJ was going to win, then I was like that means Punk better win it. And immediately after that match, we have CM Punk versus Finn Balor. And shout out to the CM Punk for the Chicago Bulls entrance, in tribute to Chicago. And as a matter of fact, his ring gear, his ring attire, with Bulls colors. So Punk came out with Chicago Bulls colors. Like I said, his gear was red and black. Just like the Bulls. And if you look carefully, he even has, I want to say it was a bear seat, and those tomahawks from the Chicago Blackhawks, like as well. And so I was like, oh, okay, cool. Punk is that definitely paying tribute to Chicago. Like I said, as soon as I saw that red and black, I was like, yeah, that's Bulls. And not only that, but they even had the Bulls PR announcer, introduce him, announce him as the World Heavyweight Champion CM Punk. They even had the Bulls, Bulls interest song, that Alan Parsons project. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, that one. You know what I mean? So they even had that. Was like great touch. You know what I mean? I thought that was very clever. You know what I mean? So as far as that, and so of course his opponent was Finn Balor, and Finn's mission was to spoil WrestleMania, and clearly he did not do that. And thankfully he didn't. Thankfully he didn't. And so so of course, Finn was definitely doing everything he could, to really carry his weight in that match. And clearly he's clearly much faster than CM Punk, and and those times where he even had Punk on the ropes, had him, kind of gave him a run for his money with the coup de grace. And so I was thinking he was going to take it, and even to the point where he was even looking at the belt. And there was even a point where I thought the Judgment Day was going to come out, but that was not the case at all. And so, and there was even a point where Punk even locked in the Anaconda Vice, even sharpshooter. You know what I mean? But of course, at the end of the day, he made Finn go to sleep. And the winner of this match, and of course, still the World Heavyweight Champion, CM Punk, Chicago legend, of course. And of course, last but not least, was the men's Elimination Chamber, which featured Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, Trick Williams, Javon Evans, LA Knight, and Logan Paul. And Logan was definitely racking up some eliminations to the point where I was like, they better not let this dude win. He beat Trick, Javon, and LA Knight. Last week in Black History Month, I was like, oh man, I took out Trick and Javon, even though I wasn't expecting either one of them to win. But yeah, and speaking of that, Trick has natural aura. Just looking at his entrance, with the way that he, like I said, with the way they came out, had that light on him, and using that platform that was turning around, like revolving. I was like, oh wow, this dude is the real deal. You know what I mean? Like I said, he's definitely got Booker T's wrestling DNA. People talk about The Rock. This dude's more like Booker T Jr. To be honest with you. And so and the thing is, the thing about it is that the Trick, it's just it has just natural cool. He's just naturally cool. You know what I mean? And so it definitely radiates. Javon Evans, aka as I call him, the 6'7" kid. You know what I mean? And of course, I like how he does not let the criticism of Kevin Nash or some of these old heads get to him, and he continues to be great. He continues to be a natural. You know what I mean? And you can definitely, and of course, they both have the endorsement of Randy Orton. You know, and I don't know if anybody noticed, but Orton was walking around the pods, and he saw a trick. You know, he started sizing him up, like standing on his tippy toes. And if you listen carefully, I mean, or rather, if you look carefully and read Orton's lips, you can see him. You can see him telling Trick, "You're not 6'5". I see him. There you go. There you go. Because I know Trick is when I said that he was 6'5", but of course, Orton wanted to be there and test that theory for himself. He looked up and was like, "Yeah, you ain't him." Even though Trick is really 6'4", and Orton himself is 6'5". You know what I mean? So yeah, that's really what it is. And if anything, even I picked up on that myself. But yeah, but of course, like I say, Orton, RKO knows game. Randall knows ball, and so for him to, so for him to give his endorsement of guys like that in the future, that says everything. And so of course, Logan Paul's the most obnoxious one, in that match. LA Knight, whatever, I ain't the biggest fan of his either. As a matter of fact, there was even a botch from my LA Knight, and if you look carefully, Orton was kind of rolling over and he actually kind of broke character, kind of started laughing a little bit. So I was like, yeah, LA Knight's, his time is kind of, he's pretty much been exposed on that one. I mean, everybody makes mistakes, but man, that one didn't look too great. But of course, outside of that, of course, we all know that Cody is the American Nightmare. Of course, Mr. Perennial WrestleMania main eventer, finish the story, so you already know what you're going to get from him. So I like how Trick, Javon, and Cody all jumped Logan. So I was like, this is the most hated dude, like really in the match, if not the company itself. He definitely has nuclear heat. You know what I mean? So yeah, he's the type of guy that you do not want. So of course, he definitely the type of guy that you definitely want off your screen. I know that's the case for me. But yeah, I would say that probably the biggest highlight, was also of course Sloan. Of course, one of the highlights was of course, with the return of Seth Rollins, wearing the son, of course, wearing the black hood, and so first, there were like two guys that came out with black hoods, and so and of course, last but not least, the next one, this next guy that came up with, with the black hood, there was something different about him, and he gives Logan a curb stomp, and come to find out it's Seth Rollins. And Seth, if you notice, he doesn't have, he doesn't have the blonde highlights, like he normally does. So I think this time around, Seth is really going to mean business even more. So I was like, oh yeah, and this definitely Paul Heyman's worst nightmare. And shout out to the cameraman, for catching Heyman's crash out. That was hilarious. And so it's just like Heyman saw witness his very worst nightmare, right in front of his own eyes, in the form of Seth Rollins. And so it's looking like it could be a Seth versus Logan, at WrestleMania. And so it was great to see Seth burn down the Vision, because clearly the Vision, at this point, is gone blind. You know what I mean? And yeah, so it's clearly like this, this concept has been, this concept has been, has been falling apart. Left and right injuries, left and right, constant over and over. And so Seth is back to to tear down whatever's left of the vision at this point, and I'm happy to see that. You know, and so, last but not least, of course, after Logan's elimination, we have Randy and Cody's sister, legacy, like I said, legacy callback, if you will, and just as things are reaching the conclusion, we have Drew McIntyre. Drew McIntyre come in and interfere and be the hater that he is, and like I said, interfere, and of course only for Cody to give him at the crossroads, and right after the crossroads, Cody walked right into an RKO, and the winner of this match on his way back to WrestleMania for his 21st appearance. But anyway, like I said, as far as that, um, you know, Randy Orton is back for his 21st WrestleMania appearance, and of course, he's back in the main event. So this is what his third WrestleMania main event, at least. Of course, I know that. I know that he was in the main event, for WrestleMania 25 with Triple H, a match that nobody cared about at all. He was also in the main event for SummerSlam for WrestleMania 30. With Daniel Bryan and Batista. So I was like, all right, then cool. So now he's back in. Like I said, he's back in another WrestleMania main event. And so of course, this time it's going to be, going to be against Drew McIntyre, and I have a strong feeling that Cody himself could be involved, and that can end up being a triple threat in and of itself. So of course, with that being said, my predictions are at least. Actually, you know what? No, I'm more like a 3 out of 4, not 2 out of 4. My predictions. I won't say I'm 3 out of 4 when it comes to my chamber predictions. So of course, the road to WrestleMania has become much more clear than it's been before. But now, of course, what we saw on Monday, like I said, Monday on the internet, of course, on Twitter, that was definitely far more interesting than what we saw on Monday night. Even though what we saw on TV was definitely very, definitely very entertaining in of itself. But the biggest headline right now is what has taken place on social media with the exchange between Jade Cargill and Rhea Ripley. So I knew for sure that that this was definitely going to be something I was going to talk about, and it's definitely giving me plenty of ammunition. And and it's so the thing is, what happened was, initially it was it was an exchange between Jade Cargill and Rhea Ripley, and so Jade mentions, of course, Jade made a reference, to Rhea, talking to creative, and so all of a sudden that took a whole nother turn in of itself, right? And Chelsea, of course, Chelsea Green wants to chime in, throw her 2 cents in, or 25 cents in rather, that nobody asked for. And and of course talks about how Rhea is someone who who's kind, wish more people could be like that, yada yada yada. And so Jade steps in and says, Chelsea, actually no, so after that, Jade claps back and says, don't make me embarrass you on this app, because let me see, she was like, don't make me embarrass you on this app, because you always have something to say about me, and rightfully so, because of the fact that no matter what Jade does, or says, Chelsea always wants to stick her nose in her business. She always has some type of comment to say about Jade, no matter what, and so like I said, it just escalated, and so so of course, Chelsea was, saying woof woof, you know, towards Jade. Then eventually she edited her tweet, even though the internet never forgets, and so it was just like, oh, you know what? Let me see if I can look it up. You know, excuse me for a moment. Let me see if I could. It is like it was hectic. I was like, oh my gosh, and I was like, I haven't seen nothing like this in a long, long time. And so yeah, so of course, um, like pretty much, Jade accused Rhea of having a creative favoritism backstage, and that was something that that definitely, that definitely rubbed Rhea the wrong way, and you know, you could definitely tell, you could tell it was something that's very sensitive, a very sore spot for Rhea. Um, but yeah, of course, um, the sources indicate that Rhea was legitimately upset with Jade's, I think she spends hours talking to create it, which is why she posted on her Instagram the story last night ahead of Raw, in terms of, people, defaming you, telling lies, whatever the case is. And so for Rhea to respond the way that she did after, of course, after Jay was clapping back at Chelsea, and then Piper Niven, of course, wanted to jump in, and the thing is, um, the stuff that Chelsea was saying about Jade, what takes it even to another level is when we find out that Nia Jax liked, you know, uh, Chelsea's response to Jade. I was like, oh, it's getting messy, So this tells me one thing, you know, Jade's, excuse me, let me slow down. And not only that, but and the fact that that Rhea, put that story out there, and not only that, but of course Buddy Murphy got involved, and it just got nasty. It got brutal. So that lets me know one thing, among many things, rather. And I even said this on Twitter. Jade's presence alone exposes a lot of insecurities, you know, um, among a lot of those women in the locker room. You know, Jade being there is the make or break. To really, to see who is secure and who's insecure. You know, Charlotte. Like for instance, Charlotte is secure in who she is. That's why her and Jade have such a great relationship. You know what I mean? Like matter of fact, she's taking a liking to Jade. They pretty much become BFFs. I think that's a big reason why they've had the segments that they've had together and stuff like that. So from jump, Charlotte knows ball. Charlotte recognizes game. And she sees when someone has it. Otherwise, she would have nothing to do with you. And she sees that Jade has it. Hence, that's why, like as a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, Charlotte has even been seen, like leaving comments under Jade's posts. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, they've even taken pictures together. Like maybe, like I said, they've even, like I said, even taking pictures together at restaurants. Like off camera, off screen. You know what I mean? So I guess so as far as that, uh, Charlotte is very secure in who she is. Bianca speaks highly of Jade. They were tag team champions. You can tell they get along very, very, very well. Naomi, same thing. Even in spite of their feud, storyline, kayfabe, and they spilled out on social media. But at the same time, if Naomi wanted nothing to do with Jade, then they would have never, like I said, never had that big three. They would have never had programs, none of that stuff. Because they know, that all three of them, all three of them can make a lot more money together, right? So, like I said, as far as those are just among, some of the main, like, big names, that speak very highly of Jade, what I mean, who have no issue with her, right? On the other hand, you had the Mean Girls. The Mean Girls being the likes of, Chelsea Green being the main cheerleader of them all. Like I said, of course, along with Piper Niven, who's on injured reserve, as well as Nia Jax. You know, those are the main ones who the messiest. Tiffany as well. Of course, Titty Time, Tiffy. You know what I mean? Like, she's another one. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea, Nia, if anything, I wouldn't be surprised if they're the main ones who, matter of fact, somebody even said this on Twitter, and that they're convinced that that the Mean Girl crew, were the ones who put the battery in Tiffy's back to say what she said about Charlotte with those divorces. You know what I mean? So if anything, I wouldn't be surprised if they're the ones who were really the main ones influencing her and putting the battery in her back, to talk reckless like she did with Charlotte, last year. Of course, in their feud going into WrestleMania. You know what I mean? And so, as a matter of fact, like I said, like I said, I know Tiffy's had, had backstage, he says stuff pretty sure with Jade as well. Of course, there's that video, I guess with Tiff, as I mentioned before, with Tiff, not, like, there's a video from a clip from a match where Tiff knocked Jade off an apron, and there's a sound bite, where somebody, where somebody says, "You black," and as a matter of fact, I would say that that Tiff even reposted that, or whatever, retweeted, reposted, whatever the case is. I was like, oh, yeah, okay, all right. So so she was telling herself, even with that, even with that clip, even with that, with that meme of her that she reposted, and so that was her co-sign. I was like, yeah, Tiff's really telling herself and making a lot of enemies, from the jump as soon as you join the main roster. And so she's clearly, found a clique that she could link up with, like I say, with the likes of Nia, like I said, Nia, Chelsea, and Piper. Like I said, those are the main ringleaders, especially when it comes to the jealousy towards Jade. And so I'll say, that those definitely, the locker room Mean Girls, and I wouldn't be surprised if if they were if they were the main ones. I believe it's also pretty much might as well be confirmed as well. I wouldn't be surprised, if I firmly believe that they were the main ones, who were leaking those stories to Fightful and Sean Ross Sapp, as it pertains to Jade's backstage reputation, painting her as the villain, painting her as the problematic, angry black woman. You know what I mean? So, like I say, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm pretty sure that I'm convinced that Chelsea is the main one that that's spreading those rumors and leaking those out to the dirt sheets, saying Jade is difficult and problematic and all this other type of stuff. Just because Jade would not bow down to them and kiss up to them. That's really what it is, And if anything, even though John Cena said on recently on O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s podcast about how that fraternity culture is pretty much gone. I'll say for the most part is gone, but what we saw on Twitter shows that there's still a remnant of that lingering on. And side note, like I said, a side note, Cena, like I said, that podcast episode was great. There's a lot of gems that I learned from that as well. Um, and like I said, like I said, as far as that. But yeah, like I said, of course, in the interview you mentioned how I was glad that fraternal clique culture was pretty much gone, but clearly shows that there's some who still want to keep that going, um, especially when it comes to that jealousy, insecurity, animosity, and so back to what I was saying before is that Jade's presence alone exposes and reveals a lot of uh, insecurities, a lot of jealousies, among the women in their locker room, because they see Jade as a threat uh, to their spot. They see her as a threat, to their place on the card, in the locker room, in the company, what have you, right? And so because of that, they lash out. No pun intended. No pun intended to Lash Legend, but the way they lash out is, you know, through, like I said, the way they lash out, of course, is through their jealousy. Of course, with the stuff that they say, the stuff, like I said, the stuff that they retweet or repost or whatever, the stuff that they like, they're really telling on themselves. And so, so if anything, that they want to make a smear campaign about Jade, and it's eerily eerily similar to the way that the higher ups painted Mercedes and Naomi, or formerly known as Sasha and Naomi, as problematic, you know uh, as tough to get along with, and just calling them everything outside of the names that God gave them. You know, like I said, this situation, backstage situation with Jade is starting to draw some parallels, and and really, you know, um, like I say, like I said, it really drawing parallels to what happened with Sasha Banks, or now Mercedes. Um, what I mean? So so as far as that's concerned, um, but but instead of it, you know, um, being primarily the front office, it's coming mostly within the locker room itself. And this is definitely not at work, because uh, Chelsea and Nia have no connection whatsoever to Jade on television, uh, in a storyline capacity. They have no connection at all as it pertains to Jade, this whole Jade and Rhea uh, title picture. They have no connection at all. So that right there, of itself, like I said, was definitely personal. There was no kayfabe involved at all in this exchange. There was nothing, like I said, there was nothing kayfabe about it at all. And once again, as I said, as I said before, Jade's presence brings out insecurities. And to continue on that point, you know, um, Jade has already cleared Chelsea uh, on the company's totem pole. She's already cleared, you know, Chelsea, Chelsea's place and career altogether off the map. I mean, from day one. Like I mean, pretty much, like pretty much, pretty much from day one, you know, um, Jade has already cleared, you know, Chelsea Green when it comes to her place, in the company. She's already skyrocketed past her in the company's hierarchy. You know, so uh, Jade's already cleared Chelsea off the map. And Chelsea's insecure about it. She's bitter about it. You know, um, that Karen gimmick that she does on screen, what we've seen, with this exchange, with her behavior, it's an extension of who she really is. I think it's become very evident that Karen, thing that Chelsea does on screen, is it's been exposed as that's an extension of who she is, especially when it comes to, I guess, like I said, when it comes to her jealousy towards Jade. You know, um, so it definitely brought out Chelsea's Chelsea Green's insecurity. That she sees someone like that as a threat, as someone who who's already escalated past her. You know, um, like I said, when it comes to the company's totem pole. You know what I mean? So she's not even on the same map as Jade. You know, even though Naya has um, been a multi-time champion since her return to the company. She's been the queen of the ring. She's been a WWE women's champion. She's been a women's world heavyweight champion. Of course, she's also been a tag team champion. Even with those accolades, she still can't even get on the Mania card 2 years in a row. You know what I mean? From the time that she came back, like I said, for back-to-back years, she came to get it on, she came to get on the Mania card. You know what I mean? Like, come on now. So I'm pretty sure that that has got to be, I'm pretty sure she's got to be feeling some type of way about that herself. You know, and Piper Niven is just hating, from injured reserve, from the IR. And so it's just like, this was like, this whole exchange was just nothing but bloodshed. You know what I mean? So at this point, I feel like, WrestleMania's theme song needs to be Kendrick Lamar's Euphoria, because that's the energy that this is giving. What I mean? So like I say, with so much, like I say, just with so much animosity and so much, anger that we're seeing right now, it's just like that's the only theme song I could think of. Sorry about that. So yeah, what I mean, like I said, I mean, it's just like, you know, to see that get so ugly, it's definitely not no work. It's not no kayfabe, none of that stuff. If anybody tells you it's a work, they're delusional themselves. Um, and so my thing is, you know, even though Jade has has quite a ways to go when it comes to, you know, some of her in ring stuff. But I'll say it like this: Jade's a lot better than, several other women that I've seen come and go in wrestling. You know what I mean? Uh, Jade, I would say, is better than what I've seen from, say from the likes of Lana, Kelly, the Bellas, Sable, you know, um, Eva Maria, especially. You know what I mean? So you've had so many women, so, of course, um, you've had so many women come and go in that company who have played in everybody's face in that division, right? You know, um, and so, all I say is that Jade is not the worst that we've ever seen. People want to make it out like that, but no, you know what I mean? Um, and another thing is that, like I say, Chelsea's narcissism and and just just all out jealousy and envy and all this other type of stuff. Um, she thinks that it's going to earn her brownie points, to be in the main event. Absolutely not, you know. And normally I would not agree with someone like Michael Hayes, but I believe he hit the nail on the head, you know, um, by saying that Chelsea was not a main event. He was absolutely right. And, Chelsea's childish attitude shows that, you know. Uh, Chelsea is feeling some type of way because of the fact that, you know, um, Charlotte wouldn't even give her a second look. You know, Chelsea is jealous and feeling beside herself when she sees Jade having those face-offs with Charlotte. Because I'm pretty sure deep down, Chelsea wishes that she was the one uh, having those face-offs with Charlotte, and she would never ever be on Charlotte's radar. You know, and she's Chelsea's definitely a fire starter, and I remember last year in the Women's Royal Rumble, um, when they had Bianca, Naomi, Lash Legend, all of them jump Chelsea. I feel like that's a metaphor for how problematic she really is backstage, and I firmly believe that that this uh, Unreal WWE Unreal special has really gotten to her head and really got her believing that she's bigger than what she really is. You know, um, and so yeah, thinking that you're a main eventer, but quite frankly, you are not that material. You are not her. You never will be her. Plain and simple. Yeah, me agreeing with Michael Hayes' take it was never on my bingo card. And it would be funny if Jade tweets a picture of Michael Hayes, and that's some Kendrick level petty. You know what I mean? That's some Cena level trolling. That would be hilarious. You know what I mean? So, and if anything, I'm pretty sure that probably go over a lot of people's heads, and I prefer it that way. You know what I mean? So yeah, so like I said, as far as the backstage drama, um, it definitely revealed a lot of insecurities, a lot of jealousies, and so like I said, I guess you could say that the toxicity continues um, as Liv Morgan cut a promo about Stephanie Bakir, saying that Stephanie um, grew up in a hut infested with fleas, or I mean, I was like, oh, whoa, we just kicked that racism up a whole nother notch. You know what I mean? I was like, oh man, But then again, it's very telling, you know, uh, when you consider who many of the higher ups voted for. So you can definitely tell that that narrative, trickles down into what they write, into the storylines. But if I am someone in that position, like as high, if I'm someone in Liv's position who, who has enough of a voice, I would think that you would, at least use that muscle to, like at least use that voice to be like, you know what, I don't feel comfortable saying this because that was cringeworthy, for Liv to say what she said. You know what I mean? I was like, yeah, that's even as a heel, that's extra. Like, nah, that was way below the belt. That was out of line. You know. Um, Also, of course, in other news on Monday Night Raw, congratulations to Penta for defeating Dirty Dom to become the new Intercontinental Champion. Pharaoh Mero, I figured that at some point Penta would capture the gold, and this was the time for him to do it. So congratulations to him. We also saw uh, Obafemi and Rusev, go after it. So it looks like that could be a main match of itself. That's That's Oba's first major feud, of course, on the main roster. You know, Gunther apparently, of course, Gunther has no opponent, no plans for Gunther for WrestleMania. Even after of course, even after he retired those legends, and so I guess their thing is, well, I guess their thing is right now, there aren't any more legends for him to retire, so it's just like, you know what, whatever, just find something, but man, almost feels like he retired Cena and AJ for nothing at this point. And speaking of no plans, you clearly see apparently there's no plans for Royce Keys right now. I'm like, yeah, but then again, signed him, and he's doing this stepping interview and is got nothing left for him to do. But I'm pretty sure figure something out maybe the night after WrestleMania. I don't know. But by the way, congratulations to Demolition for finally finally going into the WWE Hall of Fame. Long overdue, long overdue. And of course, they're the first longest reigning tag team champions of all time until New Day broke their record, and then eventually the Usos will break that record. And so, so even though they originally meant, as a copy of the Legion of Doom, they definitely carved out a Hall of Fame level career of their own. So congratulations are in order for them. And I want to sound like I'm missing something else, but yeah, and of course, Rhea Ripley, of course, she thanked Io Sky, for being her, of course, for being her teammate and getting her through a dark time and all this, stuff like that. And and of course, I could tell that that was her way of deflecting from the noise that was online. And the thing is, with the way that Rhea's makeup looked, with the purple eyeshadow or eyeliner or whatever, what I mean, like the way she looked into the camera, it almost looked like she probably in the management's office crying before that or something. Now, what I mean, I was like, man, especially when you consider that it's pretty obvious that Triple H, wants her to be his new China. What I mean. So I think that's of course there are a lot of people saying that that's a big reason why she's in the position that she's in, even though she's talented in her own right, but but it, of course clearly shows that Jade really struck a nerve, and the fact that the fact that someone like Jade, let me slow down. Of course, the fact that someone like Jade was the one to light the fire in that locker room and pretty much burn that SmackDown Women's locker room down. Like, oh man, I was like, wow, they were fighting for their life over there. Meanwhile, the Raw Women's locker room is looking at that like, well, glass not us. Meanwhile, Shawn Michaels is at NXT looking at it like, yeah, I'm glad I ain't, probably looking at it like, yeah, I'm glad I ain't got those issues over on NXT. The NXT locker room was looking more like Love Island with all these hookups. Meanwhile, the SmackDown locker room is looking like Smash Brothers Melee right now. But yeah, of course, like see, once again we see that the Kyrie Sane has has PTSD from Asuka. But the main thing I really want to address, as time is drawing near, is this, Roman Reigns' CM Punk promo. Yeah, they turned the hate level up a whole nother notch. And so, just when you think that Punk is, cooking Roman, when people think it's tied, Roman's up 2-0 again in this mic war. And you could definitely tell that Punk was frazzled. Punk was, beside himself, and Roman just looked like a smooth operator, shot of Sade. And it's just like he's been walking Punk down on the mic. If anybody were to tell you in 2015, that Roman Reigns would outclass CM Punk on the microphone, they would laugh at you. But that is what we're getting right now. um, Roman has just natural aura, and you know, Punk was talking about, of course, doing what he does best, just spin things, like, Punk being Punk, spin things in a different way, talking about how, how he brought, Roman in with the Shield, as we all know, as I said before, Roman was not the original choice for him. It was his boy Chris Hero, but Vince said no, going with Roman, and of course that led to all this other stuff, uh, and so you know, Punk was saying that Roman was chasing him, and that Roman's in the main event because of him, and all this stuff. Absolutely not. You know, as a matter of fact, I saw something where it said that there was even a stat that was brought up about how um, the Anawani family have been in at least, was it 19 out of 42 WrestleMania main events. I was like, come on now. You know what I mean? Like, ain't like, and the fact that Punk was to say that, that he's the cause for, for Roman being in the main event. Like, be for real right now. Be effing for real, because there is absolutely no way. Roman has had countless main events. You know, um, before Punk even came back. You know, and CM Punk won it. And the thing is, CM Punk. The thing about it is that, matter of fact, here it is. Yeah, so it says the Anawani family is main event in 19 of the 42 WrestleManias. Yokozuna main event at 9 and 10. The Rock main event in 15, 16, 17, 28, and 29. It's 5 of them. The Usos, main event night 1 of 39. Roman's main event at 31, 32, 33, 34, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, now 42. It's like, man, and so, what I mean? So as far as that, I mean, come on now. It's just like, dude, like, what are we talking about? Um, so yeah, that's business. You know what I mean? And the thing about it is that, and it's especially with the way, like I said, like some song, like I said, the thing is CM Punk, like his insecurities, speaking on jealousies and insecurities being exposed, his insecurities got exposed. You could definitely tell that he was shaking up on that microphone, um, didn't know what to do. He was beside himself, especially when Roman talked about uh, um, retiring him. Especially when Roman talked about retiring him and put him on retirement tour like John Cena and all this other type of stuff, and send him down to NXT to be a trainer and what have you, right? It's pretty much saying that so Roman was implying that he was gonna send Punk on a John Cena retirement tour, and that right there was definitely a huge trigger for Punk. I mean? I was like, oh man, to the point where it almost sounded like he almost wanted to cry. And so of course it got to the point where it just got nuclear, um, where Punk said that he was gonna bury Roman next to his dead, next to his dead father. I said, oh, we went there. Oh, we went there. Oh, it is nuclear. Now it's at the point of no return. So don't be surprised if Roman comes out with a picture of Larry on his shirt, or even further, don't be surprised, if Roman, carries himself, Roman comes out, with that piece of steel, if you know what I mean. Roman revolver reigns, as I like to call. You know what I mean? Like, so as far as that, don't be surprised, if Roman, you know, um, you know, comes up, shows up to Raw, you know, you know what I mean? And that's why I share that meme. You know what I mean? And so, it turns to LL Cool J from In Too Deep. You know what I mean? Or either that, or turns to my man Wood Harris from above the rim when he showed up with a gun when he was losing that game. I say, yeah, so at this point, yeah, Roman's about to go in for the kill. You know, so his new finishing move you know, could be one of them. You know what I mean? Yeah, you're gonna end up having to take Punk out at that point. So um, if you see Roman at WrestleMania uh, with the Gold Glove, if you see Roman come back, if you see Roman come back with the Infinity Gauntlet, it's over. It's over. You can forget about it. Might as well say RP Phil Brooks after that. If you see Gold Glove, Infinity Gauntlet, Roman come back, it's over. It's over. This same Roman that ran that ran over Kevin Owens with a golf cart and didn't even blink when he did it. So that it's going to be World War III on CM Punk. Roman's about to get medieval on Punk. Straight up. This is not a game. Vegas is going to be, the Dragon's Lair, the Lion's Den, if you will, and the Terror Dome, or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I would not wish that my worst enemy. CM Punk unleashed Pandora's box with that statement right there. Because Roman got something for him, and he ain't gonna like it. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. Yeah. So yeah, I mean. So as far as that's concerned, um, like I feel like I'm kind of going over my time a little bit. But of course, as far as NXT, we saw the seeds being planted even further. With this Ricky Saints and Joe Hendry feud. You know what I mean? And of course, Ricky Saints is absolutely entertaining. He did his own version. He did his own version of the Rock's concert. I like that. JC Jane retained the NXT Women's Championship. And against Zarya. By way of Sol Ruka's interference. And we see that that the stakes have gotten even higher as it pertains to as it pertains to Blake Monroe and Jada Parker's feud. As of course, they're going to end up having a street fight, as it's been announced, as it's been confirmed. You know what I mean? And of course, we have Tony D'Angelo going up against Dark State. And so if anything, like I said, of course, I'd like to see that the NXT, is still standing strong. You know what I mean? So yeah, and like I said, I definitely believe in the NXT future, and Shawn Michaels always has aces up his sleeve. You know what I mean? But I would say that the main things, the main headlines, were of course with Jade and Rhea's Twitter feud. You know what I mean? Or rather, Jade. Jade is a 1v20. This ain't no 20v1. This 1v20. I got smacked. Got smacked. Because that right with you. That's pretty much Jade Lamar Duckworth as she has become. I was like, that's really what it is. At this point, at this point, Roman might as well keep that same energy with CM Punk, also. So that is the road to WrestleMania. And like I said, the theme for me, I would say, is euphoria. And so with that being said, that is the conclusion. And so now it is time to go into the birthday shout-outs. This past Saturday, February 28th, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat turned 73. March 1st, Lupita Nyong'o turned 42. Big E turned 40. Yeah, actually, no, not 42. Lupita Nyong'o turned 43, excuse me. She turned 43. Big E turned 40. Booker T turned 61. Of course, basketball legend Chris Webber turned 53. And of course, Harry Belafonte would have turned 99. March 2nd, the legendary Method Man, future Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, by the way, Method Man from the Wu-Tang Clan turned 55. And by the way, March 1st, Ron Howard turned 72. Of course, March 2nd, Method Man turned 55. March 4th, of course, by the way, March 2nd also, John Bon Jovi turned 64. Like I said, March 2nd, Bon Jovi turned 64. March 4th, Bobby Womack, of course, would turn 82. March 5th, Marvin Winans turned 68. Of course, Tina Marie would have turned 70. Of course, the playmaker Michael Irvin turned 60. On March 6th, Shaquille O'Neal turns 54. Deal Hughley turned 63. On March 6th and on March 8th, Leon from of course, better known as David Ruffin from The Temptations, among many other movies, turns 64. And of course, Chad Gable turns 40. And on March 9th, Melina turns 47. And so that is it. And of course, that's it when it comes to, of course, that's it when it comes to the birthdays. And before I go, I would like to give a word of wisdom. It's that if you don't handle your depression in a godly way, it will have a damaging impact on your life and your relationships. And always remember that God is protecting you. Be grateful for where God has you, because it could always be worse. And that God is protecting your children, as well as your children's children. And of course, He wants to put you in position to bless the next generation and the generation after that. So of course, that is my word of wisdom. Also remember that you are victorious, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. You can also watch by way of YouTube, youtube.com/Avon West Virginia. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for watching. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.